Before you decide whether to stay, let me ask you something quietly. When was the last time you cried without making a sound? Because even explaining the pain felt exhausting. Not dramatic tears. Not tears meant to be seen. The kind that fall when the room is dark and your phone is face down. The kind you wipe away quickly, not because they're weak, but because you've been strong for too long. If that sentence made your chest feel heavy, don't scroll. This message is not chasing you. It's meeting you where you already are. Here is what most people don't understand about silent pain. It doesn't come from failure. It comes from endurance. You didn't break because life hit you once. You broke because you kept standing after it hit you again and again without rest, without validation, without rescue. And the hardest part? You never stopped functioning. You showed up. You smiled when required. You handled responsibilities that should have crushed you. But inside, something kept whispering, how long do I have to carry this alone? This is where the shift begins. Not when everything feels hopeful, but when you're tired of pretending you're okay. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a person stops begging life to be gentle and instead becomes honest with themselves. That moment is happening now. You might feel confused, emotionally numb, or strangely calm while watching this. That's not emptiness. That's your nervous system finally pausing after survival mode. Here's the truth no one told you. Your tears were not a sign of weakness. They were proof that your heart never closed, even when it had every reason to. And that matters more than you realize. Because people who feel deeply don't stay broken forever. They transform. But transformation doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with permission. Permission to stop blaming yourself. Permission to stop explaining your pain. Permission to admit that something inside you needs care, not criticism. Right now, nothing is being demanded from you. No belief, no promise, no performance, just presence. Stay with this feeling for a moment. Don't rush to understand it. Don't label it. Let it breathe. If you're still here, it means a part of you believes change is possible, even if you don't know how yet. And that part is stronger than you think. Comment the word still. Not for me, but as a quiet signal to yourself that despite everything, you're still here, still feeling, still open. Then type 1 to continue, because the next part reveals why your silence was never ignored, and how the moment you stopped holding everything in is the moment life begins responding differently. Part 2, why your silence was never invisible. There is a dangerous lie many kind people believe, that if they don't speak their pain out loud, it somehow doesn't exist, that if no one notices, it must not matter. But silence does not erase pain. It concentrates it, and concentrated pain does something powerful over time. It changes the way you see yourself. You begin to wonder if your needs are too much, if your emotions are inconvenient, if your exhaustion is a personal failure. None of that is true. Here is something you were never told. Your silence was not ignored. It was misunderstood. People assumed you were strong because you were quiet, capable because you didn't complain, unbreakable because you kept going. They mistook endurance for immunity. But strength that is never supported eventually feels like abandonment, even when no one intends it. This is why the quiet ones hurt the deepest, not because they feel more, but because they give themselves no safe place to release what they feel. You learned early that holding it together was safer than falling apart, that staying composed kept things moving, that your pain could wait. And it did, for a long time, until now. What's happening now is not weakness surfacing. It's truth rising. Your body, your heart, your mind, they're no longer willing to pretend everything is fine just to keep the peace. This moment you're in is not collapse. It's honesty. And honesty is the doorway to change. You may feel a strange mix of emotions watching this. relief and fear, sadness and calm, hope and resistance. That conflict is natural because part of you wants rest, and part of you is afraid of what happens when you stop holding everything together. But listen carefully. You're not losing control. You're reclaiming it. Control doesn't come from suppression. It comes from awareness. When you finally acknowledge your pain without judging it, something shifts. Your nervous system softens. Your thoughts slow down. Your heart feels less alone. This is why the silence had to last as long as it did. It was building awareness, not punishment. And now that awareness is ready to be used, not against you, but for you, stay with me. Because the next part explains what actually changes the moment you allow yourself to be seen, even if only by yourself, and why that changes the direction of your life in ways you can't predict yet. Comment the word seen as a reminder that your pain is real, your experience is valid, and you are never invisible. Then type 2 to continue. Part 3, the moment you stop hiding from yourself. There's a quiet turning point that happens before any visible change. It doesn't look dramatic. No one applauds it. Nothing immediately gets easier, but it is the moment everything starts moving. That moment is when you stop hiding from yourself, not from the world. You learned how to survive there a long time ago. You hid your tears. You softened your needs. You learned how to be fine. But from yourself, that's different. Hiding from yourself looks like staying busy so you don't feel. It looks like scrolling until exhaustion replaces emotion. It looks like telling yourself others have it worse to avoid acknowledging your own pain. You weren't lying to yourself because you were weak. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. But protection has an expiration date, and you've reached it. What's happening now is not exposure. It's reunion. You are meeting parts of yourself that were set aside for survival. The part that needed reassurance. The part that wanted rest without guilt. The part that longed to be understood without explaining everything. When you allow those parts to exist again, something unexpected happens. You feel heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because you're no longer avoiding the truth. Lighter because the truth no longer has to chase you. This is the emotional physics no one teaches. What you avoid follows you. What you face releases you. And facing yourself does not mean reliving every wound. It means acknowledging that the wounds shaped you, but do not define you. You are not broken because you hurt. You hurt because you cared deeply in places where care was not returned, not protected, or not understood. That says nothing about your worth. It says everything about your capacity to love, to commit, to hope. Here is something important. The version of you that survived does not need to disappear. It just needs support. You don't have to become someone new. You have to become someone honest. Honesty doesn't shout. It whispers, "I'm tired," and finally listens to the answer. If you're still here, it's because your heart is opening. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to feel, enough to stay, enough to consider that your life doesn't have to continue the way it has. That consideration is powerful because once you stop hiding from yourself, life stops hiding possibilities from you. The next part explains why this inner honesty begins to change how people, opportunities, and even timing respond to you without you forcing anything. Comment the word open to acknowledge this moment of reunion with yourself. Then type 3 to continue. Part 4, when honesty changes how life responds to you. Something subtle begins after you stop hiding from yourself. Not immediately visible, not dramatic, but unmistakable once you notice it. Life starts responding differently. Not because you asked louder, not because you demanded change, but because your inner signals stopped contradicting each other. Most people live with internal conflict. What they feel says one thing. What they show says another. What they need is buried under what they tolerate. That contradiction creates noise, and noise confuses everything around you. People, timing, decisions, even intuition. When you become honest with yourself, the noise quiets. And when the noise quiets, alignment begins. You may notice small changes first. Conversations feel less draining. You don't over-explain as much. You pause before saying yes. You sense when something is off without needing proof. This is not emotional sensitivity. This is clarity returning. Because honesty recalibrates your internal compass. Here is the part no one prepares you for. Once you stop lying to yourself, you can no longer ignore what doesn't fit. And that can feel uncomfortable. You may feel distance growing between you and certain people. Certain habits lose their comfort. Certain routines feel heavier than they used to. That's not loss. That's truth surfacing. Your system is no longer numbing itself to survive. It's evaluating to protect you. And protection does not always feel gentle at first, but it is precise. You begin to realize that some of your exhaustion didn't come from effort. It came from misalignment, from staying where you were shrinking, from repeating patterns that once kept you safe, but now keep you stuck, from carrying emotions that were never yours to hold alone. As honesty settles in, your energy starts returning, not in bursts, but steadily. You feel more present, more grounded, less desperate for relief. This is important. Desperation fades when direction becomes clear. You may not know exactly where you're going yet, but you know what you can no longer accept. And that knowledge is power. Because boundaries are born from honesty, not confidence. Confidence comes later. Right now, you're building something more durable, self-trust. When you trust yourself, decisions stop feeling like guesses. They feel like responses. And life responds differently to people who respond instead of react. This is why things begin to shift without force. The next part reveals what happens when self-trust becomes strong enough to change your future choices before they cost you, and why this moment quietly protects you from repeating old pain. Comment the word trust as a signal that you are choosing alignment over self-betrayal. Then type 4 to continue. Part 5. When self-trust quietly saves you from repeating old pain. There's a moment that arrives without warning. You don't announce it. You don't even fully realize it while it's happening. But later, you look back and understand. Something protected you. Not luck, not timing, not someone else stepping in. You did. This is what self-trust actually looks like in real life. It's not confidence. It's not fearlessness. It's not suddenly knowing all the answers. Self-trust is quieter than that. It's the pause before you agree to something that once drained you. It's the hesitation that stops you from explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand. It's the internal no you finally respect without arguing with it. And that pause changes everything. Because most pain isn't created by one big mistake. It's created by many small moments where we override ourselves. You felt it before. That tight feeling in your chest. That subtle discomfort you brushed aside. That inner voice you told to be quiet because you didn't want conflict, loss, or disappointment. You weren't wrong back then. You were surviving. But survival teaches you to tolerate things that self-trust refuses. As self-trust strengthens, patterns lose their grip. You don't feel pulled toward the same dynamics. You don't chase the same validation. You don't reopen doors that cost you peace. Not because you're bitter, but because you're aware. Awareness is what breaks cycles. This is the phase where your future quietly changes direction. No dramatic exits. No confrontations unless necessary. No grand declarations. Just different choices. And different choices create different lives. Here is something important to understand. Self-trust does not protect you by making life easy. It protects you by making your responses wiser. You may still face disappointment. You may still feel sadness, but you will no longer abandon yourself in those moments. And that is the difference between pain that shapes you and pain that shatters you. When you trust yourself, you stop needing guarantees. You stop bargaining with your intuition. You stop asking others to confirm what you already know. That inner steadiness is powerful. It means you recover faster. You attach less to outcomes. You choose environments that support your nervous system instead of triggering it. And slowly, almost invisibly, your life begins to feel safer. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because you know you will take care of yourself when something does. That knowledge creates peace. The next part goes even deeper. It reveals how this self-trust begins attracting healthier connections, clearer opportunities, and a sense of emotional safety you may have never experienced before. Comment the word safe to acknowledge that you are learning to protect yourself without closing your heart. Then type 5 to continue. Part 6. When safety becomes the foundation for real connection. There's a quiet shift that happens once you feel safe with yourself. Not excited, not invincible, just safe. And safety changes who and what can stay in your life. Most people believe connection comes from chemistry, effort, or timing. But connection that lasts comes from nervous system safety. When you no longer feel like you have to perform, explain, or shrink to be accepted, your body relaxes. And when your body relaxes, you become more present. And presence is what people actually connect to. This is why relationships begin to feel different now. You may notice that. You listen without planning what to say next. You speak without rehearsing in your head. You don't feel responsible for managing others' emotions. That's safety. And safety attracts honesty. People either soften around you or distance themselves. Both outcomes are information. Because when you stop chasing connection, the connections that remain are real. Here is something subtle but important. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You recognize that chaos once felt like passion because it kept your nervous system busy. But now, calm feels like respect. That is growth. This phase may feel quieter socially. Fewer conversations. Fewer late-night emotional spirals. Fewer explanations. But the conversations you do have feel cleaner. More grounded. More mutual. This is not loneliness. This is discernment. You're no longer trying to fill space. You're protecting peace. And peace creates space for genuine connection. As safety deepens, you may also notice a shift in what you desire. You stop craving intensity. You start craving consistency. Consistency that doesn't disappear. Consistency that doesn't confuse. Consistency that doesn't make you question your worth. That desire is healthy. Because stable connection does not exhaust you. It restores you. This is also when your intuition becomes sharper around people. You sense misalignment early. You trust discomfort without needing justification. Not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. This is the phase where your standards quietly rise. Not as demands, but as boundaries. And boundaries protect connection. They don't destroy it. If someone cannot respect your boundaries, they were never safe to begin with. Now, the next part reveals how this foundation of safety and connection begins to unlock a deeper sense of purpose. One that isn't driven by pressure, comparison, or fear of falling behind. Comment the word calm. To anchor this phase of peace, discernment, and grounded connection. Then type 6 to continue. Part 7. When calm opens the door to purpose without pressure. There's a moment when calm stops feeling like relief and starts feeling like direction. Not a loud calling. Not a dramatic realization. Just a steady sense that you're no longer drifting. This is where purpose begins to surface. Not the kind of purpose that demands you change everything overnight. Not the kind that compares your path to someone else's timeline. but the kind that feels grounded in who you already are. Purpose does not arrive when you are chasing it. It arrives when you finally have enough calm to hear yourself think. Before this phase, your energy was spent managing emotions, surviving days, recovering from nights, trying to stay functional. There was no space left for meaning. Now there is, and what fills that space may surprise you. Purpose doesn't show up as a clear answer at first. It shows up as curiosity. You begin asking different questions. What actually matters to me now? What drains me that I keep tolerating? What feels honest, even if it scares me? These questions don't rush you. They ground you, and grounding creates direction. You may notice that you are less interested in proving yourself, less drawn to applause, less motivated by urgency. That doesn't mean you've lost ambition. It means your ambition has matured. You no longer want success that costs your nervous system. You no longer want goals that require self-betrayal. You no longer want paths that look good but feel wrong. This is purpose refining itself. Here is something important. Purpose is not found by adding more to your life. It is found by removing what no longer belongs. As calm settles in, distractions lose power. You stop numbing. You stop overcommitting. You stop filling silence just to avoid yourself. And in that quiet, clarity begins to form. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to take the next right step. Enough to say no to what isn't aligned. Enough to trust that you don't need the whole plan yet. Purpose does not demand certainty. It asks for honesty. And honesty asks one question above all others. Does this feel true to who I am becoming? If the answer is no, you pause. If the answer is yes, you proceed, slowly, intentionally. This is not hesitation. This is integrity. And integrity creates a life that feels meaningful even on ordinary days. The next part reveals how this sense of purpose begins to influence your decisions, your timing, and your confidence, without turning your life into a performance or a race. Comment the word true, to acknowledge that you are choosing honesty over pressure and meaning over momentum. Then type 7 to continue. Part 9, God says, this is where the old pattern breaks forever. Stay with this message. Do not scroll. Do not rush. God says, what you are feeling right now is not confusion. It is separation. You are being separated from the version of you that survived into the version of you that finally lives. For a long time, you carried weight that was never meant to stay. Emotional heaviness, repeating disappointment, silent exhaustion, the feeling of, I'm doing everything right, but nothing is changing. God says, that cycle ends here. Not because you fought harder, but because you're no longer meant to fight at all. Here is the revelation most people miss. Your struggle was not punishment. It was preparation. God says, I was strengthening discernment, not testing your worth. That's why you learned to read people deeply. You became patient beyond reason. You felt things others ignored. You questioned situations others accepted. You weren't weak. You were being refined. Now listen carefully. God says, the season of survival is closing. This next phase will feel unfamiliar, not because it's wrong, but because peace used to feel unsafe to you. You were used to chaos, used to waiting, used to hoping. But God says, you will no longer beg for what aligns with you. Alignment attracts. It doesn't chase. From this point forward, something changes internally first. You'll stop over-explaining. You'll stop doubting your intuition. You'll stop returning to what already showed you its limits. You'll stop shrinking to stay connected. God says, confidence will rise quietly, without force. And that's the real miracle. Expect this. People who drained you will fade naturally. Opportunities will appear without pressure. Conversations will feel lighter. Your sleep will deepen. Your mind will feel clearer. God says, when alignment locks in, peace becomes normal. No more emotional whiplash. No more second-guessing. No more internal battles. But here is the warning. Listen closely. Do not romanticize the past just because it's familiar. God says, what you survived is not what you are called to repeat. Missing old pain does not mean it was good for you. It only means you outgrew it quietly. This is also why delays happened. God says, if I had given you what you asked for earlier, it would have broken you. Timing was protection. Silence was preparation. Waiting was alignment. Right now, something is unlocking in your spirit. You may feel emotional release, unexpected calm, sudden clarity, a sense of I'm ready now. That's not imagination. God says, your internal resistance has softened. Now acceleration begins. This phase will not be loud. It will be stable. No chaos, no panic, no forcing, just steady forward movement. God says, what is coming will stay. If this message confirms what your heart already knew, comment the word, ready. Why? Because readiness is not about having answers. It's about trusting direction. Then type, next part 10, because the next phase reveals the specific shift that will make your life feel lighter than it has in years, and why fear will no longer control your decisions. Part 10, God says, this is the moment fear loses its authority over you. Pause. Breathe. Stay with this. God says, what you're stepping into will not demand anxiety as an entry fee. That alone should tell you everything. For years, fear sat quietly in the background of your decisions. Not screaming, not obvious, just whispering. What if this fails? What if I lose people? What if I'm wrong? What if I regret this? God says, fear was never protecting you. It was delaying you. And now its assignment is ending. Here is the shift happening right now. Even if you can't fully explain it yet, you're no longer asking, will this keep me safe? You're starting to ask, will this keep me true? God says, truth will guide you faster than fear ever did. This is why certain choices suddenly feel clear. This is why hesitation feels heavier than movement. This is why your patience has matured into certainty. Understand this deeply. Fear thrives when you don't trust yourself. But God says, I have trained your discernment through experience. That's why you sense energy before words. You feel misalignment early. You notice patterns quickly. You no longer ignore red flags. You didn't become cautious. You became wise. Now listen carefully, because this is critical. God says, the next blessing will require decisiveness, not perfection. You do not need every detail. You do not need full confirmation. You do not need permission. You need movement, because clarity follows commitment. This is also why certain doors will close suddenly. Not slowly, not gently, but decisively. God says, what exits now is making room for something that cannot coexist with doubt. Do not chase what leaves. Do not negotiate with what ends. Do not mourn what no longer fits. Release is not loss when alignment is ahead. Here's what will change in you next. You'll stop replaying conversations. You'll stop justifying your boundaries. You'll stop fearing other people's reactions. You'll stop shrinking your dreams to stay comfortable. God says, comfort kept you alive. Conviction will make you fulfilled. Expect this internal upgrade. Your voice will sound steadier. Your decisions will feel cleaner. Your energy will stop leaking. Your presence will feel grounded. God says, you will move without needing to announce it, and people will feel the difference. But hear this warning with love. Do not confuse calm with stagnation. God says, peace is not passive. It is powerful. When you feel calm, that's your sign to act. When you feel grounded, that's your green light. When you feel ready, that's alignment speaking. Something important is approaching, an opportunity that doesn't pressure you, A conversation that shifts direction. A realization that changes priorities. A moment where you choose yourself without guilt. God says, this time, you will not abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. That cycle is over. And finally, this truth. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. God says, you arrived exactly when you were strong enough to sustain what's coming. If this message speaks directly to where you are right now, comment the word courage. Why? Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move without letting fear lead. Then type next part 11, because the next phase reveals how your identity is about to shift publicly and privately, and why people will start responding to you differently without you changing a word. Part 11, God says, people will respond to you differently, and you won't know why at first. Stop scrolling. This part matters more than you think. God says, your identity is shifting before your circumstances do, and that is always how real transformation begins. You may not see visible proof yet. No dramatica non cement. No sadenaplos. But something inside you has recalibrated. God says, your spirit is standing taller, even when your life looks the same. That's why the energy around you feels unfamiliar lately. Here's what's happening quietly. You're no longer seeking validation. You're no longer explaining yourself. You're no longer shrinking to be understood. God says, when you stop chasing approval, authority begins to follow you. And people can feel that. Very soon, you'll notice subtle changes. People listen more closely. Some feel uncomfortable around you. Others suddenly respect your boundaries. A few disappear without explanation. God says, not everyone benefits from a version of you that knows their worth. And that's okay. This phase is not about being liked. It's about being aligned. God says, I am removing your need to be chosen by others because I have already chosen you. That truth will settle deeply in your chest. Now listen carefully because this is important. You are entering a season where your presence speaks louder than your words. You won't need to prove intelligence. You won't need to defend your choices. You won't need to explain your growth. God says, consistency will introduce you before you ever open your mouth. Expect this. Some people will test you. Some will question your confidence. Some will try to pull you back into old roles. But God says, you are not who they remember, and you do not need to remind them. Silence will do the work. This is also the phase where you learn discernment at a new level. You'll feel it immediately when something is off, when an offer isn't aligned, when a connection has expired. God says, I am sharpening your intuition because the next level requires precision. Trust that feeling. It is not fear. It is wisdom. Here's the internal shift most people miss. You're no longer rushing to arrive. You're no longer anxious to be seen. You're no longer comparing timelines. God says, peace is your confirmation. If it costs your peace, it's too expensive. Now hear this clearly. Your growth will intimidate some people even when you are kind. Your calm will unsettle those who thrive on chaos. Your boundaries will offend those who benefited from your silence. God says, do not apologize for evolving beyond survival mode. You didn't change to hurt anyone. You changed to live. Something powerful is forming next. A role you didn't chase. A responsibility you didn't force. A recognition you didn't beg for. God says, I am positioning you where effort is noticed, not exploited. This time, you won't have to overextend to be valued. Before this part ends, receive this. You are becoming someone who is respected even in rooms you are not in. God says, your name will be spoken differently now, with trust, with seriousness, with expectation. If this message matches what you're feeling deep inside, comment the word alignment. Why? Because alignment is when who you are and where you're going finally agree. Then type. Next part 12. Because the next phase reveals why a sudden opportunity or conversation will force you to choose quickly, and how choosing correctly will collapse years of waiting into one moment. Part 12. God says, the decision that comes suddenly is the door you prayed for quietly. Pause. Breathe. Read this slowly. God says, what feels rushed is not random. It is rehearsed in the unseen. You're about to face a moment that doesn't give you weeks to think. No long explanations. No perfect timing. Just a choice. Here's why this moment will feel intense. You've been prepared silently. God says, I trained your discernment before I changed your environment. That's why your instincts feel sharper now. That's why hesitation feels heavier than usual. That's why excuses no longer sit right with you. This decision won't look dramatic to others, but for you, it will feel like a fork in the road. God says, one option repeats the past. The other reshapes your future, and you'll know which is which. Not by logic, but by peace. Listen carefully. The right choice may scare you. The wrong one will comfort you. God says, fear that expands you is different from fear that traps you. One challenges your identity. The other protects your habits. Choose growth. You might wonder, why now? God answers, because delay would turn preparation into doubt. You are ready now, not later. If the opportunity arrived last year, you would have questioned yourself. If it arrived next year, you would have overthought it. But now, your spirit recognizes it. Expect this pattern. A message that interrupts your routine. A conversation that feels unexpected. An invitation that feels slightly out of reach. God says, I do not invite you to impress. I invite you to step into alignment. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be willing. Here's a truth most people never hear. The opportunity will not beg you. It will appear once. God says, what is meant for you does not chase. It confirms. If it resonates deeply, that's your sign. If it drains you immediately, let go. This decision is not about success. It's about direction. God says, when direction is right, provision follows. Stop asking, will it work? Start asking, will this move me closer to who I'm becoming? Some people around you may not understand your choice. They'll say, be realistic, why change now? You're overthinking. God says, not everyone can recognize the door you prayed for. They didn't sit with you in the quiet. They didn't carry the weight. They didn't grow through the waiting. You did. And hear this clearly. If you choose correctly, time compresses. What felt delayed for years will begin to move quickly. God says, momentum is the reward of obedience. You won't chase progress anymore. Progress will respond to you. This phase ends with confidence, not noise. You won't announce your move. You won't seek approval. You'll just act. God says, when you move in faith, explanations become unnecessary. Let results speak. Before you go to the next part, anchor this moment. Comment the word decision. Why? Because naming it helps you recognize it when it appears. Then type next part 13. Because the next phase reveals why a relationship, habit, or identity must end cleanly, and how letting go creates immediate space for something better to enter. Don't miss it. Part 13. God says, what you release now will not return empty. Stay here for a moment. Don't scroll. This part matters more than you think. God says, I'm not removing things to punish you. I am clearing space to protect you. Something in your life has reached its expiration, not because it was bad, but because it completed its assignment. You felt it already. Conversations feel repetitive. Effort feels one-sided. Your spirit feels quieter around certain people or habits. God says, when peace leaves, permission leaves with it. That is not confusion. That is guidance. Here's the truth most people resist. You don't outgrow things loudly. You outgrow them silently. God says, I whisper first. I only shake when you ignore the whisper. That discomfort you feel, it's the whisper. This release will feel strange because you've attached history to it. Memories, time, effort. God says, history is not a contract. Just because something was part of your past doesn't mean it belongs in your future. Let's talk honestly. Some connections stayed longer than they should have because you didn't want to be misunderstood. God says, you're not responsible for how others interpret obedience. You don't need to explain growth. You don't need to defend healing. You don't need permission to move forward. This is important. The thing you're being asked to release will try to convince you it's harmless. God says, the most dangerous delays come disguised as comfort. Not everything harmful hurts loudly. Some things slowly drain you. Once you let go, expect this. Mental clarity, sudden energy, new ideas arriving without effort. God says, when the wrong weight is removed, speed returns. You'll feel lighter, not lonely. If it were meant to stay, it would strengthen you, not exhaust you. You may ask, what if I regret it? God answers, you will only regret what you didn't obey. I never remove without replacing. I never close without preparing a better opening. I never subtract without multiplying later. Watch the timing. Within days or weeks of release, a new connection appears, an opportunity aligns naturally. Your confidence stabilizes. God says, space invites alignment. That's how blessings enter, not through force, but through availability. This release does not require drama. No arguments, no long speeches, no emotional exits. God says, graceful endings attract powerful beginnings. Leave with clarity. Move with dignity. Trust the process. Here's the final confirmation. If thinking about letting go brings relief, that's your answer. God says, peace is permission. Before moving forward, seal this phase. Comment the word, release. Why? Because acknowledging release prepares your mind and spirit to receive what's next. Then type, next part 14, because the next phase reveals why something you thought was delayed is about to arrive faster than expected, and how to recognize at the moment it shows up. Stay ready. Part 14. God says, what felt delayed was being prepared to arrive all at once. Pause. Take a breath. This is not coincidence that you're here. God says, I did not slow things down to frustrate you. I slowed them down to align them. What you thought was late was actually being layered. You've been measuring progress by time. I've been measuring it by readiness. God says, if it arrived earlier, it would have broken you, or you would have mishandled it. The delay wasn't denial. It was protection. Here's what most people don't see. While you were waiting, multiple pieces were being moved quietly. Someone else had to exit. A condition had to shift. Your discernment had to sharpen. Your self-worth had to stabilize. God says, I never release blessings into unstable hands. That's why growth came first. You may have asked, why does it feel like everyone else is moving faster? God answers, their pace is not your proof. Some journeys look quick because they end quickly. You're slowed down because it's meant to last. Now listen carefully. What's coming will not arrive in fragments. God says, I'm not sending it drip by drip. I'm sending it in waves. Expect overlap, clarity plus opportunity, peace plus momentum, confidence plus confirmation. This is acceleration, not chaos. You'll recognize it by this sign. You won't feel anxious trying to control it. God says, what is aligned does not need to be chased. It will meet you halfway. It will make sense quickly. It will feel calm, even when it's big. Another truth you need to hear. You are being taught how to receive. God says, desperation repels what calm expectation attracts. That's why the waiting refined you. That's why your reaction softened. That's why you stopped begging and started trusting. Watch how it shows up. A conversation that changes everything. An offer that feels strangely familiar. A door opening through someone unexpected. God says, I often deliver answers through ordinary moments. Stay present. Stay observant. Do not rush to announce it. God says, some blessings grow best in silence. Let stabilize first. Let root. Let confirm itself repeatedly. What's real doesn't need immediate validation. If you're wondering, how close is it? God answers. Close enough that preparation matters more than patience now. Clean up distractions. Protect your energy. Say no faster. Listen deeper. Alignment requires focus. This part is crucial. When it arrives, it may not look exactly like you imagined. God says, I answer the intention behind your prayer, not always the image. What you wanted for security, for peace, for purpose, that's what's coming, just in a better form. Seal this understanding before moving on. Comment the word, ready. Why? Because readiness activates awareness, and awareness prevents you from missing what arrives quietly. Then type, next part 15, because the next phase reveals the one inner shift that will determine whether this blessing stays or slips away, and how to lock it in permanently. Stay grounded. It's closer than it looks.